Hello everyone, my name is John Anderson. I'm from Fluke Networks from the AirMagnet division. I'm glad to be part of this great event, first Wireless LAN Professional Summit. I want to thank Keith for getting this all together for us. Just to get started here, let me just a quick show of hands. How many here are regular users of AirMagnet Survey Pro? Okay, excellent. How many have been regular users for over a year? All right, as Keith mentioned in his opening ceremonies, I'm not here really to represent my company or the Fluke Networks, really myself, and I myself have been in this position for about a year. What I've been able to do in that time is talk to many power users of the product. Many of you I've had email conversations, even phone calls with, and over the course of that time I've been able to get a lot of great input on best practices for doing surveys. I've learned how to use the product from a lot of you. So what I'd like to do is just at this time, just for the next hour, go over some of the things that I've learned from talking with many people like you, about the best parts of the product, how to use it, best practices. And as we go along, if you have any questions or have any input of your own, just feel free to speak up or raise your hand, and we'll hopefully go away. Hopefully, if you are users or new users, you can go away with a few extra little tips and techniques for using the product. Now, the AirMagnet survey has a lot of features, a lot of little bells and whistles and side features. Some of them are very useful, some maybe not quite so. The one thing I have learned or heard from a lot of professional wireless LAN installers over the past year is very similar to what we just talked about, high density surveys. Going out, doing arenas, doing stadiums, doing metropolitan areas where you have a high density of users, and how best to do the surveys. So we've taken a lot of the input we've gotten. We've made a few enhancements on the latest version of Survey Pro, I'll go over. We're continuing to look at more things that we can do to enable these high density surveys. But just a few of the tips that we've picked up when you're doing a high density survey, it really comes down to being able to segment that survey. So we've worked with different vendors on doing some outdoor arenas, and the way they like to do it is to take their overall, well, I'll call it a floor plan. Obviously, it's more of a map when you're doing an outdoor arena, but take it into and basically segment it so you can get proper density, proper resolution in each segment. The very basic way, of course, is to segment into quadrants and then do each quadrant individually. But I've also talked to some some installers who have actually done that and then moved it up in tiers. And once you do your different surveys, then they want to be able to merge them into one single project file. Another thing I hear a lot about that's really important when you're doing surveys, especially high density ones, is the machine on which you're doing it on. Make sure that it's a high performance machine. The latest version of Survey Pro 8.6, even though it's still a 32-bit app, it does support 64-bit operating systems, Windows operating systems. And we have done an enhancement in this latest one to enable access to 4 gigabytes of RAM. So one of the issues that I heard a lot about last summer was when we were merging surveys or taking high data file captures, a lot of times it would be really slow. And you would run out of memory really fast. Even though 2 gigabytes is a lot of memory, and you really need a very large data file to really utilize that much of the RAM. Some of the more modern day surveys we're seeing today actually do that. So we've, in this latest version of Survey Pro, sorry about that. In this latest version of Survey Pro, we have enabled access to 4 gigabytes, basically doubling the amount of memory that the survey application has access to, so you can actually collect larger data files. So have a dedicated machine that you have for these surveys and use that. Make it sure that it's fairly high performance. If it's running Windows, 64-bit will give you that extra advantage. Segment your floor plan. And then another feature that we've added is when you're merging your data files, before you just had two very large data files that you would have to merge. So one of the things we did was we added a couple filters to the data file merge. So if you go over here to the where your data files actually are stored, each of these files, even though they're part of the same project, they're independent data files. And when you're segmenting a high-density survey and you want to merge those, if you just right-click here, you can go to the Data Merge utility. And then you can select which of the two data files you wish to merge. We got some feedback last year that a lot of times this took a very long time to do, or sometimes it would just fail to complete because of the size of these data files that you're collecting in a high-density survey. So two of the things that we added were a merge filter based on signal level. So when you're in an outdoor arena, for example, and you've got 500 APs, we worked with a vendor that was doing an outdoor arena with over 1,200 APs in it. You get a lot of APs in that data file, and each one's logging measurements. And so that can really get those data files very large. A lot of times, though, these are very weak ones, down in the -100, in the -95, -99 dB level. Probably not something that is really going to be part of your interference analysis. So you can set a minimum signal level here and filter out all those access points, those measurement points that are below that signal threshold. And that's one way to really make your large data file merge more efficient, more economical.
This dialog box, bugbears in AirMagnet has always been you were never able to extend that dialog box. You never maximize it. Is this maybe a very recent build?
I'm sorry?
Is this dialog box for the data merge? Is this in a very recent build?
Yes, it's the 8.6 version.
See all of the files before.
Yes. So we released version 8.6 last November, and that's what this feature became part of. The other merge filter that you can add to this is a number of samples. So if you're using auto sampling, for example, and you're sampling every, let's say 3 to 4 feet, you may not actually need all those measurements. And if it's good to collect them, but when you go to merge, if you find out you just got way too many data points in there, you can go in there and just say only include every 2 samples or only include every 3 samples. So with these two features, you will be able to merge much larger data files than what you were able to in the previous versions of Survey Pro. Another very important thing to consider when you're doing surveys, especially high-density surveys, is the number of sampling points you're collecting and what your signal propagation assessment is going to be. So really in any survey application, when you're generating heat maps like this, you're taking a measurement point at a very specific point on your map. But then when you generate the heat map, it extrapolates that. And how far it extrapolates is based on the signal propagation assessment. One thing to keep in mind about Survey Pro is the default parameters are really set to cover a number of different scenarios. Unfortunately, each of these different scenarios are very different. Being in an indoor office environment with walls, being in an indoor cube environment, being in an outdoor area like an arena, and they all really require different propagation assessments. Over here, if you open up the configuration dialog, you can see where the signal propagation assessment is going to be. Well, actually, that's actually taken when you actually create your project. You're going to specify what your signal propagation is going to be. Let's just say temp 8. The other thing to keep in mind is when you're bringing in a floor plan, if you don't calibrate it, there is a set of default calibrations that the survey will automatically latch onto. Those will be incorrect. So even if you don't calibrate it right when you create the new project, what you want to do is make sure before you actually do your survey, you set that calibration. Because if you use the default parameters, you're going to be wrong. But when you're creating a new project, right here you have signal propagation assessment. And the default parameter is based on the selection of these different environments. And by default, it always opens on an open space office, which is set to 40 feet. In most cases, 40 feet is going to be too long. To really do a good survey, you want to take sampling points much closer than that, maybe every 10 to 15 feet. And you want your propagation assessment typically to be maybe a little bit more than that. So it really depends on the environment you're in, but in most cases, if you're doing a proper survey and taking data points where you're supposed to, people I talk to that really know what they're doing like to put about 15 feet as a propagation assessment. So when you're starting this, I would recommend doing 15 feet, unless you have a specific reason to do something else.
Just some feedback on that. If your recommendation is to change that value, why don't you just change that value in the program so we don't have to change it?
Well, that's a good question. In many environments, the 40 feet may be what you do want. What we really would like users to do, and I think we can do a much better job at this, is really force them into selecting what's proper for them. I mean, the reason why we have those environments set up with the default parameters in them is no one case fits all models. So really, we want the user to go in there and set what they want, but we are looking at some re-engineering of the product to really put this out in front of users more and really try to get them to choose more proper configuration values upon default.
I know this is supposed to be product focused, but you represent AirMagnet.
Sure, go.
I'm going to do it anyways. I think you know what I feel in AirMagnet. Can we have it where we could actually have that as a, like John was just whispering in my ears, and profiles where we could say, these are our default values? Because the problem with, the reason why I make that comment is that when you send let's say you send a tech out to do the survey with the label for you,
Yes.
if you have to constantly remind them to change those values, then we can have issues in our survey data when we go back to review it. So if we could have it where we can modify the config file or something that would say, these are our values that we want to use, there you go. And I know we can do that by building the survey file.
Building. Right, that's the way you would do it today, right? You'd build a project with these and then you'd send it to it. But what you're talking about is maybe changing the global default parameters. You know, that's good input. I think that's something that we can definitely do. You know, another thing that I hear a lot about that we are going to be changing in a future release, hopefully a new release soon, is when you first import the heat maps, you'll notice over on this left box is your filter box that allows you to select what you're going to see in that heat map by access point. You can select it by SSID, or you can select it by channel. When you first import a heat map, by default, everything is selected. And in about 99.5% of the time, you don't want to see everything. You're going to see a lot of APs in here that you know, maybe not part of your network. You do want to see them in some heat maps because they're interference sources, but in others, not necessarily. If you want to see your SNR coverage, for example, of your network, and you bring up the SNR heat map, by default, you're going to see SNR coverage on that heat map for everything you have selected over here. The thing to keep in mind about surveys is the heat maps are color-coded for values. So for example, here we have the signal strength heat map. And you can mouse over any point and see the individual signal strengths of your individual access points and channels. But the color that is represented on here is represented by the strongest measurement. So whatever the AP has the strongest signal level at that point, that's what's going to be color-coded. And so another thing that's always part of a best practice is when you bring up a heat map, go over to your filter here, hit this button, which is deselect everything, and then go through here and just select the ones that you really want to see. If you really want to see coverage for a specific SSID, go over here and select that SSID. Now you can see a proper heat map for that specific SSID or that specific channel that you're interested in. One of the things that we're trying to change about this is have some way of guiding the user into doing that. Because even though most of you who are power users of the product probably know this, a lot of new users, when they first open it, they may produce the heat map of everything, put that in the report, and give that to the customer, and that's could be very misleading. Yes?
Yeah, while we're on that subject, when are you going to change the checkboxes to radio buttons? The 4 and 5-ish?
Actually, that's very good. The very next release, we're doing that. And I'm not just saying that either. The question was, when are we going to change these checkboxes to radio buttons for the 2.4 and the 5 gig? We're actually updating the whole UI quite a bit for this next release. We realize this is another thing I've gotten a lot of feedback on. That's the great thing about starting as a product planner position for this product is I get to talk to a lot of power users who've been using it for a decade, and I hear all the things that they say, well, it'd be better if you could do this. And one of the things I heard a lot about was the UI is kind of outdated. Buttons aren't in logical places. So the next release that we're working on now is going to make the UI much more organized and put radio buttons in there.
Yeah, so where that impacts us as a vendor, because knowledge levels vary in the field, right? Is people that aren't familiar with the tool, it comes up by default, they don't know what's in their door. And so then networks get accepted based on the word used, right? And then but if the coverage is not actually adequate, right, we have problems later. So it'll actually help to catch deployment errors at the beginning, and everybody gets happy.
Okay, yeah, that's great feedback. We are, as I said, updating the UI. However, it's going to be somewhat limited in scope. We're not updating the whole workflow structure or anything, but that is something that we are looking at doing as well to try to really guide the user in the process of not only setting up a proper survey, but generating heat maps with the right filter set so that when they generate the report to give to the customer, it's more meaningful. Another question here? Yes?
Over the years, when I've worked a lot with AirMagnet Survey Pro, like for instance, if you load a really huge file, a lot of surveys in it, you have to touch every specific sub-survey, and then it does this recalculation stuff. But sometimes when you open up a file, you're just gonna look at it and say, okay, how was it in this D wing? I don't need to zoom in on the map or anything like that. I just want to see like a cached view instead of, again, a lot of recalculations like it does this math stuff. But I always thought that if you should grab, how did it just look? I know you can't zoom it and you can't manipulate it then, but you can get rid of all this recalculation stuff then.
So what's your question?
It's the question is, would that be there?
Are you looking to zoom in closer on a heat map to see it in high res?
Just to get back into a project that I've worked with before, and all the math has been done. I just want to have a quick preview on how did it look, the map, without recalculating.
Okay, well, one thing you can do, the question was how can you bring back a specific configuration, a specific filter of a map without it recalculating. One thing you can do is create data filters. Over here, these are view filters. But if you hit this button here, you actually create a data filter. What this is going to do is save certain access points or certain SSIDs to a data file, and then you save that data file and it shows up as a new data file over here. So for example, if I only want to see a certain number of APs, I save it to filter, and now I've got a brand new data file that specifically only has measurements for those that I've selected. Now when I bring it up, it doesn't have to go through that whole refresh recalculation thing. Yes?
It feels like Planet has been written by a totally different team to the rest of the product. So there's some basic functionality that's not in Planet. You can't select on the screen to zoom in. You go to the file menu, there's no recent history of files. UI being rewritten,
Yes.
is it likely that we might see some changes on that sort of functionality? And if not, who can I email my
Well, first of all, to answer that second question, that's easy. You can email me. Any input that anyone has on the product, anything that we can do better, if you find a bug in there that you're just wondering why it hasn't been fixed yet, any enhancement, anything like that, email me. I'll give you a card afterward. Just in short, my email address is john.j.anderson@flukenetworks.com. I don't know if it's in the under the profiles in the schedule now, but yeah, just feel free to email me. We are doing a lot of work on Planner. You may be aware that last year we released multi-floor Planner, and it's really somewhat, we did it in a different framework, so right now it's somewhat of a different app. It actually pops up in a different window. That we're really going to be focusing on that particular version of Planner going forward and adding all new capabilities and functionality to that.
Totally negative, and I should say something positive. And Enhancement was known for blue screens for many years and crashes, but I haven't had a blue screen. I think I've even had a crash in 2 years, and I run it quite a lot. And I think you guys mentioned one of the field days, quite a lot of work on stability.
Yes.
So on that perspective, at least I found it good.
I'm glad to hear that, and we are continuing to work more. I mean, every release, the last two releases we did, plus the one we're working on now, we are doing specific improvements to the overall performance and internal stability of the application. So it's great to hear that that's come a long ways, and I can say that we are actually even getting better on that one.
Will multi-floor planner have an E-plane option?
I'm sorry?
Will multi-floor planning have an E-plane?
What do you, E-plane?
Yeah, so you can actually
Oh, elevation plane.
kind of see where your APs are on the first floor compared to second floor.
Yeah, I mean today, yes, it will, so that you can see the bleed through on the different floors. Yes, so we do. I mean, the thing is, you can. We have the two sets of antenna patterns. One is for mounting the AP horizontally. The other is for mounting it vertically. But we do have a basic set of assumptions in there for vertical propagation, and you can use multi-floor planner to see bleed through from the floor beneath or the floor above based on where on that floor you're mounting it. There are some improvements. We are working on that as well to make that more under the user's domain of definition as far as how much that elevation actually works. The next thing I'd like to cover is another enhancement we've made in this last 8.6 release is on the reporting section. So if you go over to reports, let me do this here. Where'd my report go? There we are. So before we had a set of standard templates, which basically you would choose a template, it would fill it in with whatever data file you had selected, and that was it. And then we had like 3 or 4 different custom templates that you could go in and actually define what you wanted in each, including the text readouts. We basically made every template a custom template. So all the standard templates that you may be familiar with in the past are still there. For example, overall coverage report by AP. But if you select that one, you'll notice that you can actually go in here and it'll still have the same configuration as a custom. What we basically did was create a custom template and then pre-configure that to match each of the previous default templates. So if you're accustomed to using a specific default template report, you can go in there and still see that. It's going to mimic exactly what it did before, but now you can actually go in there if you want to customize it just a little bit. You like this custom or this default template, but you want to remove one section or add one section. You can basically now go in there and do that the way you would previously with a custom report. Another thing that we've added in the last release was heat maps for 11AC parameters. So our 11AC version of Survey now can use a standard 802.11ac adapter. We tested with a number of adapters, selected the ones that we found gave the most consistent, reliable measurements, and added those to our supported adapter list. And using a standard 802.11ac adapter, and we support both USB versions and also the Intel PCIe version, you can go through there and actively associate with an 11AC network and do active and do Iperf surveys. You can also do passive surveys and collect all the different 11AC parameters, including the new MCS indices, the phi rate, new phi data rates, the new operating modes. But also our previously supported custom AirMagnet adapters, like many of you use that Proxim USB adapter, or an internal Intel 6200 or a 6300. You can also do passive 11AC surveys on those. And in fact, the advantage that using one of those 11N supported adapters give you is because they are custom drivers, you can also get signal to noise ratio measurements off them. And so today we have two versions of how you can do survey. One is using a custom adapter, which today are all of our previously supported 11N and before adapters. And you can do passive 11AC surveys with those. Or you can use one of the new standard 11AC adapters, like from Netgear or from D-Link or from Intel. And you can also do a passive survey. You will not get signal to noise ratio from them though, because those aren't available via standard adapter or drivers. But you can actively associate and get signal measurements from an active association to a network, and also do Iperf surveys. So you can actually connect to an 11AC network, set up your Iperf server, run Iperf survey, and get a survey of what your user throughput is across your floor plan using 11AC. And one thing, I have like a top 10 list of the top 10 input I hear from system integrators and professional wireless LAN installers about doing installs and doing diagnostics on wireless LANs. And one of those top 10s are, I asked them, do you guys you always do pre-deployment surveys, or do you do post-deployment surveys, or do you do both? The most common answer I get is, well, we do one or the other, because most of the time my customer won't pay for both. My customer only wants to pay for one. And so the key takeaway I get is, I hear from everyone, it's always best to do both. There's real good reasons for doing both, but a lot of times the customer won't pay for that. The key takeaway I got from that is surveys are expensive. You're hiring somebody to actually go walk a floor, and if it's a room this big, it's probably no big deal. But if it's a wide office complex, a hospital complex, or a football arena, that's a pretty expensive proposition. So the way we've set up doing these surveys is with multi-adapters makes it really efficient. A walk once, collect all type of deal. So the recommended way of doing the surveys with the different adapters is to do a 2-adapter survey. Use one of our custom 11N supported adapters like the Proxim USB adapter or the Intel 6200 or 6300 series to do a passive survey. And that'll give you all the 11AC measurements. In fact, this passive survey here was done with the Proxim, and you can see I can go down here. I can get all my 11AC MCS indices in both directions. I can get my operating mode. I can get my channel width to include new 80, 40, and 80 megahertz channels. Also supports 160 megahertz channels as well, so when that comes along, it'll be ready. You can get all these passive survey heat maps using one of these custom 11N adapters, but then also do an active survey at the same time using one of the 11AC adapters. By doing the active survey, you can actually get Iperf measurements collected over your 11AC network. So I can go down here and I can say, show me my Iperf throughput up. and I get a heat map of my Iperf throughput rates both in the up and down directions.
Just to be clear, the passive survey is pulling beacons, so the RF heat map is not showing you anything different. It's not showing you the VHD rate, it's showing you S and R
Correct.
for the beacon, which would be totally different from the AC data rate.
Correct. Correct. So on the active surveys, we're able to do actual user throughput. We're able to do the PHY data rate connection. And it's very interesting. We also got a utility on here called diff view, where you can take, it's usually used for before and after analysis, but you can also take like your Iperf throughput rates, your PHY data rates, and map out what the difference of those are. But going back to your question or your statement, yes. So an active survey will give actual throughput and PHY data rates. A passive surveys will give you all the parameters, including RSSI from the beacon frames.
So one problem I have with the active, when I try to run the Iperf, so I usually run active, I don't run Iperf. So I have, unless I'm just trying to catch the data rates themselves, because that's basically what it's. But the Iperf throughput, as you probably know, is not good. It's not even close to what I can achieve with a standalone Iperf server. So I think there's something about running Iperf and doing the survey at the same time. There's blocking happening somewhere. So the Iperf numbers are very low.
Yeah, and it's really depends on, and that also depends sometimes on the adapter that's being used. We're actually looking at that right now and coming up with a recommendation for if you're doing an Iperf survey at high rates, what would be the best adapter to use to make that a little bit more appropriate. At lower rates, we found it will be very much the same. It's really when you get like above 100 meg that we start to see a little bit of a gap there.
In the past, you were able to set the roaming threshold using, well, so the problem I've had doing active surveys as opposed to one survey, often for voice, you can be standing up the next AP or close to it, and the client still hasn't roamed.
Yeah.
That's because, well, you're using your D-Link or your Proxim, your voice over Wi-Fi phone will have roamed by that point. And so it's essentially I end up just doing passive survey for the verification. And I realise
But-
that you're not getting per channel and so forth, but you're also not getting uplink, when doing passive. So when I've looked, the adapters that were supported where you could actually set their roaming threshold, they all seem to be old adapters that look as if there's no new adapters that you guys were able to get the code or write code for where you could have that ability. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, I don't know how far, what all adapters are not, you're not able to set the roaming controls for. The 11 AC adapters that we've added using standard drivers, so that does not give us that control. But we are working on a new set of adapters for 11 AC that will give us finite control of stuff like roaming and channel scaling and stuff like that.
In the user guide, they all seem to be ABG and then seem to be any N. And I just assumed it's because you guys couldn't get that control.
Yeah, I mean, we, as you know, support a very wide range of drivers, of adapters. And except for these new standard 11AC ones, they've all been customized to a certain degree. And depending on the adapter type, and more appropriately is the chipset inside of there. And what we found is two different adapters that use the exact same chipset pretty much behave the same way. But yeah, using those different drivers does give us different amounts of control. So we do have a different set of features that are supported for different adapters. And that's just the unfortunate consequence of supporting such a broad range of adapters. What we're really trying to do is cater to our wide user base as much as we can. If enough users come in and say, well, we really want to use this sort of adapter, then we'll launch a project to build support for it. But it's anybody that's done driver work before understands that it's very difficult work. Getting driver engineers are very special type of engineers. So we're trying to we're working right now actively. We're constantly have projects underway to support more drivers and provide more support of them. But yeah, there'll never be parity among all the drivers that we were able to have support for. Okay, another next thing I want to cover. How many of you use AirMagnet survey for an Iperf survey? Oh, not many. So people that use survey a lot but don't do the Iperf, what's the reason for not doing Iperf surveys?
So, previous versions, what we encountered was simulating tests on Iperf without the final coverage of the Iperf show. Stop.
It wouldn't roam, you mean?
There's no roam. You have one AG in the environment when the test is found.
Okay.
So you get to the edge of coverage and all of a sudden Iperf stops. Okay. Then AirMagnet functionally locks up until you reset the server. Okay. And then you can save it. You can't save it after it's locked up unless you reset that server. It was a real painful experience working with it.
Okay. One?
I didn't call out Seattle specifically, but I spent days fighting that problem. So yeah, you don't have ubiquitous coverage of tests. So you just have one AP, you want to see what it's going to do, you want to see what the grade
Yeah.
is. Another AP, and you go walk through the same room, the same space, you get to the edge of coverage. And you never know exactly where that is, right?
Right.
5 steps,
Well, that's why you're doing the survey, right?
2 steps into that room, then all of a sudden you're locked up. It's like, okay, I got to run back, reset the server. Like, okay, now I can save that data. You know, so it's a fault checking problem, right? It's like you should have an option when it arrests to say you want to save this data, and then that would be great, right?
Well, one thing, so solving the lesser of those problems, which is saving. I don't know if many people know, but under the configuration window, there is an option here to prompt for a save every few minutes. This is also a good technique, going back to doing high-density surveys, just the fact that at some point you could run into an issue with the data becoming too large or something just goes awry with it. You want to make sure that data is saved. So another best practice that I recommend you all do is under the configuration, the main configuration, the very first dialog you see right down here, prompt for a save and then go ahead and set that every 1 minute, every 5 minutes. And what that'll do is as you're going along, it'll come up and say, do you want to save your data? You just hit yes and you move on. Then that gets written to the data file, which is then saved, and you can bring that back up.
Is that saved as a new sample, or is it just saved into
The
the previously named sample?
previously named.
So if I'm walking a huge stadium, for example, and I want to read all of one sample of the entire section, I can have that auto-save prompt, and it comes up with prompts.
Yes.
What if I'm walking between 2 test points and I'm auto-logging data?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I stop somewhere. I mean, how does that work when I go to save? Because it has an average.
It'll save. That's a good question. I don't know specifically the answer. My guess that will save since the last manually clicked button, because the auto sample buttons are actually kind of stored off in this little volatile memory until you click that next point, and then it right, right. Yeah, it'll save it from the last manually entered point. And that's my guess. I don't know for sure, but that's my guess. But again, doing a best practices survey, that auto sampling thing is a great feature, especially when you got a long straight path to go. But in reality, most surveys you do, you're probably not going to, maybe if you're doing one sample point every 3 seconds, let's say, you maybe have 10, 20 auto sampling points there.
I'm sorry, I've had this pent up for a while.
Let me hear it.
When you're scanning a channel, you have the ability to scan that channel for X number of milliseconds. And the lowest number is 250 milliseconds. I can bring that up to however many milliseconds I like, but I can't go lower than that. So if I'm doing a passive survey and I want to see 11 channels of
Yeah.
causes a problem for me called lag in AirMagnet. It actually represents heat that isn't where it's supposed to be, right? Because it takes 8 seconds, and if I'm auto-logging data every 1 or 2 seconds,
Yep.
I haven't gone through rotated all-throw. It will very, very slow.
Yeah.
And that's a problem because my surveys take so long.
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance to strike between getting good, accurate measurements that you're needed. I mean, you can set beacon rates on APs to be several seconds. So, being able to, we set that as minimum as we can to be able to get the right sort of measurement. But I mean, you're absolutely right, and that also comes into best practices, right? Is you want to make sure that you're only scanning the channels that you're interested in. Sometimes that's all, but sometimes it's a subset. If it's a subset, go into configuration and set it for those. And then make sure that you're walking slow enough that you're collecting, that you're able to scan through all the, for a passive survey. Mm-hmm. Okay, so do a multi-passive survey adapter and set each adapter up for a different set of different channels.
That's the word. That would be a rational use for me. If it's 5 or 6 cards, yeah, it looks silly to have this array, but that's down there, right? They just, tell them to check it for radiation.
Sure. No, and that's exactly why the multi-adapter support is in there, is because there's several different needs for being able to collect measurements over different adapters. I mentioned the fact of doing an active and a passive at the same time. Doing VOFI surveys, you want to be able to measure what your next channel is that your VOFI phone would roam to when you're getting into roaming situations without missing any measurements in that gap that it takes to do roaming. So we actually sell as an accessory multi-USB hub, multi-adapter hubs that you can plug in and put in different adapters. And the ergonomics, I'm sure, has a lot of improvements we can make to it.
But that's just a feature request, it's not a question.
Okay.
And when the FCC and other regulatory equivalents release more, assuming that more channels are released, it's only going to get worse in 5 years.
Yes.
You're going to have to start scanning.
You're going to have 60 gigahertz channels, all kinds of stuff down the road.
So yeah, that's great input. That's something that we'll see if there's some ways to improve that, because again, the overwhelming input I've gotten from professional wireless LAN engineers over the past year was the time it takes to do a survey is a very costly resource. And so making it as efficient as possible is definitely a value.
If I were scanning 2 channels to 1 channel, does it average out like the last 3 samples that it took for that spot? Like, why do I have to scan in one place for a while to get this stable signal? If I'm scanning 6 channels, sometimes I have to stand there for a few seconds to get that.
You mean, why does it take the 250 millisecond minimum?
Well, it takes you do 250. Is it like average the last 3 samples? Do you know how the logic works? No, I'm not sure during that. I mean, I know that that's their per channel scan time, what it's doing there. Is it taking multiple measurements and then averaging them, or if it's just looking for one? Because if you're looking for like a pilot signal, you may only get that once or twice. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that logic is. Okay.
Don't know. Okay, yeah, just a couple of things on actual doing Iperf surveys. Where are we on time here? Oh, okay. Well, let me move on to the next one then. Another feature that when I talk to people, the people that use it like it a lot, and they actually say, well, this is one of the things I really use Survey for. Other people I talk to don't use it at all, and a lot of times they don't know it. And that's the AirWise engine for doing requirements. So one thing that's really kind of tricky about wireless LAN deployments that you don't really see in the cable installation world is what's good enough? What do I really need to test for? You know, in the cable world, and you got all these, IEEE standards are telling you exactly what measurements need to be made, what those values need to be made to give it that stamp of approval. Haven't really gotten there in the wireless LAN world yet. But what we do have, so what we put in here is this, what we call the AirWise engine. What this is going to do is allow you to set up a policy that has all the different measurements you're able to take with Survey, what those thresholds for pass-fail should be, and then you really got two sets of thresholds for each individual measurement. You have what that measurement value should be. So for example, your RSSI, you could, I think by default we have it set to -67, I believe. You can set that to whatever. Your SNR, you can set, not sure what the default SNR is, probably 20 or 25. You can set that up or down. But then the other set of threshold for that measurement is how much of your floor plan coverage needs to meet that in order to pass. So what you can do is you can go into here, you can set up a specific policy. You can save that so you can have 10, 20, 50 different policies. Each policy is going to specify what a measurement value needs to be, and then what percentage of the floor plan needs to be covered with that measurement value in order to be called passed. So for example, let me go back to a display and bring in something here. So I select my data file, I go to AirWise, and let's just say I can set my signal to noise ratio coverage. Now unfortunately on my laptop I don't get this, this view here, what this actually is. Yeah, I'm going to have to do that here. I'm sorry? Okay. Will it go to 1366? Thank you. Okay, so over here I can get all the measurements that I took with the survey, and they're all set with default thresholds. So for example, I can go to my signal to noise ratio coverage. By default it's set to 25. But let's say I'm trying to do this for higher MCS rates of 11 AC. I talked to a few vendors about what is the SNR rate that you should have for 11 AC to get into those higher levels of QAM. And for the most part, they've been telling me in the low 30s, 32, 33, which is pretty darn high. But let's just say I want to increase this maybe to 28. And then over here, I can select how much of my floor plan actually needs to be covered by that in order to be good. And I have here 97.6 or let's see, no, 100% was my default threshold. And because my coverage, the coverage that meets that threshold of 28 dB for SNR is going to show up in green. And if it doesn't meet it, if it falls below 28, it's going to show up in various colors. So I can immediately see what area of my floor plan has that coverage area and what area doesn't. Now this is very good not just for determining do I pass or fail my deployment, but if I do fail, where and what I can quickly do. Now on your display heat maps, a lot of you may realize that you can move this color legend. For example, on my signal to noise, I can move this color legend up a degree and say, just show me everything that's above 30 dB of SNR, and I can immediately see where I'm falling short. The AirWise engine just gives me a really solid way of not only doing that, but also seeing how far short I fall, and doing it, giving me pass-fail statistics for different measurements. Is it? Yes? I'm sorry, I didn't pick that up.
I said, can I build these? Export them out, send them to the rest of the engineering?
Yeah, you can export them. I think they have to be part of a project. Do you know if they have to be part of a project? Or?
Two questions.
So, two questions, Jake. One is, can you save the report? And there's any of the video screen, the configs. So if you want, you can go up to the requirement policy and you can make your own policy, save it, and send them off. So you can make one for Vocera if that's what you want. Yeah, there's a little plus button to make a new one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then there's the little disk icon will let you save it.
So I can save policy as, and I can give it a new name. So you just have to remember where in your file structure you saved it to and where to pull it off from. So this is also really good. For example, if you're doing an 11 AC project and you're really concerned about user throughput, you want to make sure, ultimately all these other parameters you're designing for signal coverage and SNR. You're designing to minimize CCI. You're designing to make sure that your 11 AC channel bandwidths are, if you're using 80 megahertz channels, you got good enough coverage with your APs there. But ultimately, it all comes down to user throughput. User capacity, which is really what new wireless LAN technologies are about, are directly dependent upon what your PHY data rates and your user throughputs really are. And so if you do an Iperf survey, I can go over to AirWise and select.
It's the last time that happens, guys. Turn off your phone.
So I can say, okay, my Iperf throughput by default was 24, but I really want to be able to give, let's say 45 megabits per second on my uplink. I can set my threshold and see how much of my area is covered by that. And I can immediately see, well, in this area, these main hallways, it's covered. These areas it's not. This is a lobby. I'm not really concerned. But over here, I have some executives. I want really good throughput for them. So I need to be able to improve my Iperf throughput there. And one good little technique for looking at different measurements here is the multi-view. So if I go over here to multi-view, I can really set up, let's see, why am I multi-view not showing here? Well, let me do diff view instead. So I can go over here to diff view, for example, and I can do my select an Iperf survey, get Iperf throughput up. Over here, I can select the passive survey I did at the same time using multi-adapter and see what my SNR rate ratio is. Now these aren't going to, this is diff view, so this isn't going to show me both of them at the same time. I guess I need to do this in multi-view. Well, let me do this. Let me bring up a different sample project. Okay. Okay, for whatever reason, I'm not able to get my multiple windows showing up, probably because I'm using an engineering build. Okay, but there's using the production release of it, you can, and the multi-view, you can bring in your Iperf heat maps right next to it, get your SNR heat maps, or get your channel with coverage heat maps, and you can just do a visual comparison of your coverage of the two and get right down to, this is great diagnostics, is right down to why your Iperf throughput may not be meeting the objective in a certain area. Maybe it's because you got too much channel interference there. It could be because your SNR is too low there or whatever, and that can allow you to make intelligent decisions about either moving an AP or adding an AP or changing the power level or changing your channel assignment plan. Another thing we added on the 11AC, knowing that going to wider channels like 80 meg channels is going to lead to some co-channel interference issues. And the back off mechanism that was incorporated into the 11AC standard, we have a channel overlap heat map, which is a new one. And this is going to show you where you have two adjacent 80 meg channels that overlap. And the degree to the impact depends on whether or not they share primary 20 meg channels or those 20 meg channels are actually far enough apart that they could fall back to separate 40 meg channels. So it helps you verify your channel assignment plan. Last thing before, just to wrap up here, the one other overwhelming input I hear from people is it's really all about capacity. What is my capacity of my network? How many users can I support? As we know, capacity is directly related to throughput. You get higher single user throughputs, you can support more users, of course at lower throughput rates. But so today we have a very effective way of measuring what a single user throughput would be using an Iperf survey. And I was just curious if anyone had any techniques they could share or would like to, or any viewpoints on how you really translate single user throughput, albeit with a specific client, be it 11AC, 11N, or 11A, to what a potential capacity could be. Because what I like to do is do the Iperf survey, see what my throughput is, and then even though I can't specifically say from that, well, you can support 20 11N users, or you can support 10 11A and 15 11N users doing, web browsing on here. I can at least see proportionally where my capacity is going to be. Have any of you ever tried any techniques for converting what a throughput would be to a specific user capacity based on the 802.11 technology they use and based on the applications they're using?
The only thing that comes close was this other tool. I think Keith knows the name of it, where you can load this kind of Iperf client on multiple devices at the same time. Then sample when all of them launches at the same time, traffic will be a single point that kind of shows you what is this school initiative. I think we call it one-on-one initiative here. Like what they can really sustain with their current infrastructure. But that's a picture I like to see there. It's somewhat close to what you're asking, that you can really see how it will scale a lot of clients on.
Yeah, and the previous discussion where they were talking about users in the thousands and thousands of range, what we're trying to develop is a little bit more economical technique for determining if I've got 1,000 people in this section that I need to support, what user throughput do I really need in order to support all those? And it's going to depend on these 11N and the 11A, how much airtime they need to transmit a byte. Also, are they doing web browsing, or are they looking to stream video? So it depends on a lot of user input factors, but being able to translate what a raw UDP or TCP throughput is until using those input into saying, yes, I can support 1,000 11N users who are doing web browsing. I think that would be very useful. Yes?
I don't really think it's possible to do it from AirMagnet or from any single tool because you're asking a system level question. I've seen some of my data now. I use a mix of different things. I use Cherry for some things. Right? I use AirMagnet instead of cells.
Yes.
and then find out the system data on the system. That's really the only way to create a cohesive picture.
The stadium,
So-
you have to look at historical data. I mean, and then there's no way to determine what unused demand there is, right? All I know is what bandwidth I put through the system. And it doesn't matter what the capable of doing if the clients weren't there to demand more bandwidth. Have a large enough sample size, you can actually look at it historically. And you know what you've got. Another way is like where you can think about the applications that are modeling. So these are my applications, and this is what my AP can do. These are my applications, these are my clients, and this is my AP. Right? And then essentially do what you had done for this for AP, like the client has two connected gap. You are essentially creating a composite client, which is the mixture of your client mix, and the application is mixture of your application mix, and then you can get that idea of single AP. And then you can basically take that at a theoretical level to further down to what is capacity that you are trying to handle. Right? So that's another way.
Great comments. That's why we're going to lunch. So if you want to continue that conversation, the lunch is upstairs and there's round tables and you can talk to each other around that. At 1:45, we're starting promptly at 1:45. Gregor's up on troubleshooting. We're doing an hour worth of 10 talks. So come back excited. The first hour, we're going to go pretty quick. So see you back here at 1:45.